The studio lights were hot. The band had just wrapped their intro, and Jimmy Kimmel leaned into his desk with that familiar smirk. The smirk that always meant trouble for whoever was sitting in the guest chair. The cameras zoomed in, the crowd cheered, and the stage was set for another easy night of jokes, banter, and late-night TV charm. Except this time, it didn't go that way, because tonight's guest wasn't laughing. Tonight's guest wasn't playing along. Tonight's guest was Mark Wahlberg. And within minutes of stepping on stage, what started as playful banter erupted into one of the most heated live confrontations in late-night history. By the end of it, the unthinkable had happened. Mark Wahlberg, Hollywood A-lister, star of blockbusters, a man who had faced down villains on screen for decades, was escorted off Jimmy Kimmel's stage in front of a stunned audience. Expelled. The crowd gasped. The cameras shook. Millions at home stared wide-eyed as the broadcast cut abruptly, leaving nothing but unanswered questions and the unforgettable image of Wahlberg storming away under the bright studio lights. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't planned. This was raw, real, and humiliating for both men, and it all began the moment Jimmy Kimmel decided to push too far. Mark Wahlberg walked onto the stage with his usual swagger, dressed sharp, grinning, waving to the crowd. The applause was deafening, the cheers bouncing around the studio walls. For a moment, it looked like any other late-night appearance. A movie star making the rounds, promoting his latest project, playing the game. Jimmy stood to greet him, offering a handshake that Wahlberg took firmly. But when the host tried to guide him toward the chair with his free hand, Wahlberg resisted slightly, tugging back with a look that was half play, half warning. The audience laughed, thinking it was all part of the act. Jimmy smirked. Wahlberg didn't. They sat. The applause faded. Jimmy leaned forward, papers in hand, his trademark smirk returning. "Mark Wahlberg, ladies and gentlemen," he said. "The man who can play a cop, a criminal, and a priest all in the same year." "Talk about range," the audience chuckled. Wahlberg gave a tight smile, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. "Yeah," he muttered. "I've heard that one before." It was subtle, but the shift was immediate. The energy dropped, the laughter thinned. Jimmy pressed on, unfazed. "So," Kimmel continued, "you've got a new movie coming out. Another tough guy role, huh? I mean, Mark, at this point, do you even remember how to smile on camera? Or do you just frown professionally?" The crowd laughed louder this time. Wahlberg didn't. He leaned forward, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "You know, Jimmy," he said slowly, "not everything's a joke." The laughter died down. A ripple of discomfort spread across the audience. Jimmy chuckled awkwardly, waving his hand as though brushing away the tension. "Come on, Mark, you know me. It's all in good fun. You've built a whole career on looking like you're about to punch someone in the face. That's a compliment." Wahlberg shifted in his seat, crossing his arms. "Yeah, doesn't feel like one," the audience murmured. The cameras caught every flicker of Wahlberg's expression. The clenched jaw, the narrowing eyes, the way his body stiffened like a man preparing for a fight. Jimmy glanced at the crowd, then back at his guest, realizing too late that his usual routine wasn't landing. He tried again, pushing harder. All right, let's be serious. You've done so many roles. Cops, boxers, soldiers. Which one's harder? Pretending to be tough, or actually being tough?" The words hung in the air. The audience chuckled nervously. Wahlberg's expression hardened. He leaned closer to Jimmy, his voice low, sharp, and unmistakably real. "You want to find out?" Gasps. Real audible gasps rippled through the studio. Some audience members laughed nervously, unsure if this was still part of the show. Jimmy blinked, thrown off, his smirk faltering. For the first time that night, the balance of power had shifted, and it was no longer in the host's favor. Wahlberg leaned back, his arms still crossed, his gaze locked on Kimmel. The silence stretched long, too long, and everyone in the room knew this wasn't banter anymore. This was the beginning of a confrontation that would spiral far beyond what anyone expected. The silence after Wahlberg's line, "You want to find out?" was deafening. For a late-night studio that thrived on easy laughter and applause, the air felt suddenly heavy, charged, like static before a lightning strike. Jimmy Kimmel shifted in his seat. His smirk faltered, though he tried desperately to keep it alive, forcing out a chuckle that sounded more nervous than confident. "See, folks," he said, gesturing toward the audience. "This is why you don't mess with Mark Wahlberg. Even when he's on a comedy show, he looks like he's about to drop-kick the host. The audience laughed hesitantly, unsure whether to lean into the joke or brace for something real. Wahlberg didn't move. He kept his arms crossed, eyes locked on Jimmy, jaw clenched like granite. "Come on, Mark," Jimmy tried again, softening his tone. "I'm just kidding. You know that." But Wahlberg leaned forward, his voice low, the microphone catching every syllable. "Nah, you're not just kidding. You've been taking shots since I walked out here." Gasps scattered through the audience. The crowd's nervous energy grew sharper. The cameras caught every flicker of tension. Jimmy's forced grin, Wahlberg's unblinking glare, the sweat forming along the host's temple. Jimmy tried to pivot. "Look, let's talk about the movie," he said quickly, flipping his cue cards. "You're playing a Navy SEAL, right? Lots of training? Lots of discipline? That must have been intense." But Wahlberg cut him off, his voice rising, sharper now. "You think I came here to be a punchline, Jimmy? You think I'm gonna sit here while you crack jokes about me, about my career, about what I do?" The audience gasped again. This wasn't late-night banter anymore. It was real, raw, and spiraling. Jimmy stammered. "Mark, I make jokes about everyone. That's the show." Wahlberg leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing, his finger stabbing the air between them. "Yeah, but you don't push everyone the way you're pushing me." The tension snapped. The audience murmured loudly, some booing, others shouting encouragement. Jimmy raised his hands trying to settle the storm, but Wahlberg's voice cut over him, commanding, furious. "You want to sit there and act like a big man behind a desk making fun of people? Fine, but don't expect me to play along." Not tonight. The silence that followed was electric. Jimmy's grin disappeared completely. His eyes darted to the producers off camera, searching for help, but they froze, unsure whether to step in or let the spectacle play out. The confrontation had begun, and Jimmy was already losing. Jimmy cleared his throat, his voice wobbling slightly as he tried to steer back into safer waters. All right, let's cool it down a bit. You're a great actor, Mark, nobody's denying that. But come on, you can take a joke, right?" Wahlberg's laugh was short, humorless, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. He leaned back, shaking his head slowly. "You call that a joke? Nah, you call that respect? Absolutely not." The crowd erupted again, some cheering Wahlberg, others booing the exchange, but no one quiet. Jimmy's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. "Mark, listen, this is late-night television. We keep it light, Wahlberg snapped back, louder, sharper. "Light? You think it's light to sit here and tear down someone's work? You think it's light to invite me here just to run your mouth? You've been mocking me since I sat down." The audience gasped, their voices rising in waves. The tension was unbearable, the energy boiling over. Jimmy tapped his cards nervously against the desk, his voice high-pitched now.
Mark, relax, relax!"
Wahlberg barked, his voice booming through the studio. "You want me to relax while you disrespect me live on air? Nah, Jimmy, you crossed the line." The studio was chaos. The audience shouted, some standing, clapping wildly, others jeering. Security guards shifted nervously at the edge of the stage, exchanging glances with the producers. The band members froze, their instruments silent, their eyes wide. Jimmy forced a smile, desperate, almost pleading. Okay, let's bring it back. It's all good. Mark Wahlberg, everybody, he's just giving me a hard time, right?" But Wahlberg wasn't smiling. He leaned forward again, his voice low but cutting through the storm. "You think I'm joking with you, Jimmy? Look at me. Do I look like I'm joking?" The crowd gasped once more, louder this time. A woman in the front row shouted, "Oh my God!" The camera zoomed in tight. Wahlberg's eyes blazing, Kimmel's smile gone, the tension unbearable. Jimmy's hand trembled as he adjusted his mug on the desk. He looked at the audience, then back at Wahlberg, then toward the off-camera crew. For the first time in years, he looked rattled, completely rattled. And Wahlberg pressed harder, his voice rising again. "You think you're clever. You think you're funny. But you don't get to mock me and walk away from it. Not tonight." The roar of the audience hit a fever pitch. Some chanted Wahlberg's name, others shouted for security, but the sound was relentless, a wall of chaos. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. His lips trembled, his voice caught, and the silence exposed him. Wahlberg stood, slowly, deliberately. The cameras tilted up as his full frame loomed over the desk. The crowd shrieked, half in excitement, half in panic. Security guards moved in closer, producers waving frantically, signaling to cut the feed if it went further. Jimmy raised a hand weakly. Mark, sit down. Let's just... But Wahlberg shook his head, his voice final, brutal.
No, I'm done with this.
You crossed the line. The studio was pandemonium. The camera zoomed out frantically, catching Wahlberg towering over Kimmel, the host's face pale, his smirk gone. Audience members leaned forward in their seats, mouths open, phones raised. Security edged closer, ready to intervene. And with that, the escalation had reached its peak. Wahlberg's fury was unmistakable. Jimmy's control shattered, and the stage was seconds away from exploding. Mark Wahlberg loomed over Jimmy Kimmel's desk, the studio lights catching the sweat on his forehead, the glare in his eyes unmistakable. The audience had stopped laughing altogether. The chuckles that normally carried Jimmy's monologues had died hours earlier, or at least it felt like hours. Every second of silence now landed like a hammer, each breath drawn sharper than the last. Jimmy forced himself to laugh, but the sound was hollow, brittle, and drowned by murmurs from the audience. He lifted his cards, shuffled them nervously, then dropped them flat against the desk with a thud that echoed. All right, he muttered, his voice straining to sound casual. Mark Wahlberg, everybody. He's intense tonight. But Wahlberg didn't move back. His shadow stretched across the desk, his posture unrelenting. He jabbed his finger toward Jimmy again. You think I came here for this? You think I flew across the country to be your punchline? You cross me, Jimmy. You don't get to hide behind those cards. The words cut like blades. The crowd gasped again. A woman in the back yelled, "Sit down!" But her voice was lost in the swell of chaos. The band sat frozen, hands resting limply on their instruments. Eyes darting nervously toward the producers clustered in the shadows of the stage. Jimmy's face flushed, then paled, his smirk gone completely now. He raised his hands as though trying to calm Wahlberg, but the trembling gave him away. "Mark," he said, his voice unsteady, "you know this is all in good fun. That's what we do here, jokes, laughs. That's the show." But Wahlberg leaned closer, his voice low, seething, amplified perfectly by the microphone. "It's not fun when the joke's one-sided. It's not fun when the respect's gone. You think you're untouchable behind that desk? You're not!" The audience shrieked, some with excitement, others with fear. The camera zoomed tight, catching every flicker in Wahlberg's face, every bead of sweat forming on Jimmy's temple. And then, the crack. The moment that shifted the tension into something irreversible. Jimmy, his voice high-pitched with desperation, tried one more jab, a last attempt to reclaim the show with sarcasm. He smirked weakly and muttered, "Well, at least you're not threatening me like one of your movie characters." Yet, the audience groaned audibly. Wahlberg froze, his eyes widening for a split second. Then his expression hardened. He slammed his palm against the desk, the sound reverberating across the studio like a gunshot. "That's it," he snapped, his voice booming, raw with anger. "I'm not here for this. I'm not your character, Jimmy. I'm Mark Wahlberg, and you don't get to talk to me like that." The room exploded. People screamed, some clapping wildly, others shouting for calm. Security guards surged forward, their black shirts flashing under the lights, their heads lowered, their eyes fixed on Wahlberg. Producers waved frantically from the side, signaling for cameras to pull back, for the band to stay silent, for the chaos to be contained. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, his hands raised, his voice trembling. "Mark, please, just sit down. Let's finish this." But Wahlberg shook his head, his voice final, brutal. "No, we're finished." The escalation had reached its breaking point. The studio was pandemonium. The audience shouted over one another, security guards closing in, producers waving their arms desperately. Wahlberg stood tall at center stage, his chest heaving, his glare locked on Jimmy. The cameras shook as operators scrambled to keep the shot steady, caught between chaos and the unspoken order never to cut away until the very last second. Two security guards approached Wahlberg cautiously, one on each side. He turned to face them, his hands raised halfway, not in surrender but in fury. "Don't touch me," he barked, his voice echoing through the studio. "I'll leave on my own," gasps erupted again. The audience's energy boiled into shrieks and applause, the noise overwhelming, a wall of sound. Jimmy sat frozen at his desk, his mug untouched, his eyes wide. The smirk, the sarcasm, the safety of comedy, all of it had evaporated. He looked small now, dwarfed by the chaos around him, by the man standing over him, by the disaster unfolding on his own stage. Wahlberg turned back once more, pointing at Jimmy, his voice steady, deadly serious. Remember this, Jimmy. You don't get to disrespect me. Not on your stage.
Not on mine.
Not anywhere. The audience erupted, half in cheers, half in shock. The camera zoomed out wide, capturing Wahlberg's final words as the security guards hovered, waiting. Wahlberg shook his head, muttered under his breath, and stormed toward the wings, his footsteps pounding against the stage floor. The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, shouting, screaming, their voices a chaotic mix of awe and disbelief. The band sat frozen. The producers gestured wildly. Jimmy pressed his lips together, trying to form words. But nothing came. He reached for his cards again, shuffling them nervously, then dropped them flat on the desk. The cameras caught every detail. Wahlberg storming out, Jimmy pale and rattled, the studio vibrating with chaos. And then, abruptly, the feed cut to black. No closing joke. No outro, no applause track. Just silence. The final image burned into millions of screens. Jimmy Kimmel slouched at his desk, shaken and pale, while Mark Wahlberg's figure disappeared off stage, expelled from the show after the most heated confrontation late-night television had ever seen.